On June 25, 1876, General George Armstrong Custer sat atop his horse on a hill overlooking the banks of the Little Bighorn River in present-day Montana. The Civil War hero, renowned for his bravery and good fortune, was plotting an ambush on the largest Indian encampment ever to assemble on the plains. Little did he know that this would be his last stand, and that this was the day when Custer's luck would finally run out after a career of daring risks and near misses. Remembered by some as a gallant war hero and by others as a bloodthirsty villain, General Custer was a man full of contradictions and controversy. He was both a lover and a fighter, a brave but reckless warrior, and a glory-hungry but disobedient soldier. Who exactly was General Custer, and why is he such a controversial figure? George Armstrong Custer was born in Ohio in 1839, the youngest of 5 children. Young Auntie, as he was called because he couldn't pronounce his own middle name, was sent to live with his older sister in Michigan at an early age. Custer earned his teaching certificate in 1856, but he had bigger dreams for himself than teaching at a grammar school. He entered West Point Military Academy in 1857, where he was known for spending more time on pranks than on his studies. He was routinely reprimanded and constantly received demerits, often earning himself extra weekend guard duties. In an event that would foreshadow future issues with his career, he was once even court-martialed for failing to stop a fight between 2 cadets. With all these extracurricular activities, it's not all that surprising that he graduated dead last in his class in 1861. Custer graduated from West Point into a country in chaos. The Civil War had just broken out in April of 1861, and Custer saw his opportunity for glory. He joined the Union Cavalry, where he attracted the attention of his superiors for his bold leadership style, daring cavalry charges, and tactical brilliance. In June 1863, he became the youngest brigadier general in the Union Army at the age of 23. The boy general, as he was called, got his first taste of leadership in battle just a few days later during the infamous Battle of Gettysburg. On the third and final day of the bloody conflict, Confederate General J.E.B. Stuart's cavalry divisions were attempting to take the Union Army's rear by surprise when he was cut off by Custer's forces. After a ferocious battle between thousands of horsemen, Custer's men succeeded in driving off the Confederate cavalry, playing a decisive role in the Union's victory in this important battle. By the end of the Civil War, Custer's daring and bravery had earned him a promotion to Major General in charge of a whole cavalry division. Highly unusual for an officer at the time, Custer was known for leading his men from the front rather than from the rear, and he was often the first to charge into battle. General Custer also seemed to have a knack for avoiding injury, despite fighting in numerous major battles and having 11 horses shot out from underneath him. He managed to avoid serious injury throughout his career, and the term Custer's luck was coined to describe this uncanny good fortune. Custer was involved in some of the most defining moments of the Civil War. His own cavalry forces blockaded Confederate General Robert E. Lee's final retreat, and Custer himself was the one to receive General Lee's white flag, signifying his wish to surrender to Union General Ulysses S. Grant. Custer was also present for the signing of the terms of surrender between Generals Lee and Grant on April 9, 1865. Custer was so central to the Union's Civil War victory that General Philip Sheridan purchased the table that was used to sign the terms of surrender and gave it to Custer's wife in gratitude for her husband's service. Just prior to the end of the Civil War, Custer had married Elizabeth Libby Bacon in February 1864. Her father, a judge, was not supportive of the match, as he considered Custer to be beneath her. After initially rejecting him, he eventually won her over, and they began an intense courtship and passionate letter-writing habit that would persist throughout their marriage. Custer is famously quoted as saying, "I would be willing, yes, glad, to see a battle every day during my life." His life's ambition was to gain fame and glory for his battlefield exploits, and Libby was his devoted partner in this endeavor, happily playing the part of the faithful lady to his daring warrior. Custer was also notoriously flamboyant. He paid special attention to his appearance, especially his long golden hair, which he perfumed with cinnamon oil, and he always dressed in the height of the late 17th century fashion, in velvet outfits with gold lace detail and large sombreros. In 1866, Custer was promoted to lieutenant colonel, and he and Libby headed to Kansas to help deal with the Indian problem. After the Civil War had ended, more land was needed to accommodate American settlers, and as they expanded westward, they inevitably clashed with the local Indian tribes. By the 1860s, most of the local Indians had been ruthlessly forced into reservations or killed. But the Great Plains were the last Indian holdout, and the Plains Indians vowed to avoid a similar fate. Custer participated in numerous raids and battles with the Sioux and Cheyenne Indians over the control of the Western Territory. Custer faced two legendary Indian warriors, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, for the first time in 1873 when his unit was protecting a Northern Pacific Railroad survey at Yellowstone. The government had been encouraging trains to stop so that passengers could hunt the buffalo for sport. The Indians relied on the buffalo for food, and needless slaughter escalated tensions. Although he succeeded in driving them off this time, little did Custer know that he had just faced the warriors who would bring about his own downfall years later. During this time, Custer once again demonstrated his disregard of authority when he left his regiment without permission to visit his wife Libby. He was court-martialed yet again for this exploit and stripped of his rank and pay for a year. His punishment only lasted 10 months, though, before General Sheridan reinstated him to lead a campaign against the Cheyenne Indians. Custer was learning that fighting Indians was much different than fighting Confederate soldiers. The Indians had the advantage of being much more familiar with the terrain, and since they were fighting to preserve their way of life, they were much more motivated to fight to the bitter end than Custer's career soldiers. By 1876, the Plains Indian Wars had reached a stalemate. In 1868, South Dakota's Black Hills had been set aside for the Great Sioux Reservation. However, once gold was discovered in those hills just a few years later, the government quickly reneged on their deal and took over the land. Custer was tasked with relocating the Indians to their new reservation, but things didn't exactly go as planned. Rather than go quietly, most of the Indians traveled to the banks of the Little Bighorn River in present-day Montana to join Custer's old adversaries, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, to fight for their freedom. On June 25, 1876, Custer was one of the first to arrive at the meeting point near the encampment, where he and the other generals planned to gather before fighting the Indians and forcing them to surrender to the reservations. While waiting for the other generals to arrive, it was decided that Custer and his men would move in and surround the Indians, then wait for reinforcements. Once he had located the Indians' camp, however, Custer decided to launch a surprise attack rather than wait for reinforcements. No one is quite sure why he thought this would be a good idea, but based on what we know about him, we can assume that arrogance and glory-seeking played a big role in him leading his men to certain death. The battle famously came to be called Custer's Last Stand, but in reality, he never even had a chance against such a mighty force of Indian warriors. Custer divided his 600 men into 4 groups. One group was to stay with the supplies, 2 groups were to attack the Indians from the south, and Custer's own group was to attack from the north. The South group was the first to attack, but they retreated almost immediately once it became obvious that they were not only outnumbered, but outgunned. With more than 2,000 warriors, this was the largest gathering of Indians ever seen on the Great Plains. The Indians also had superior repeating rifles and bows and arrows, while the cavalry only had single-shot rifles and .45 caliber revolvers. Custer and his own men, not knowing that their comrades had retreated, launched their attack from the north. Overwhelmed by the Indians' superior numbers and firepower, Custer's command collapsed completely, and it quickly became every man for himself. Within an hour, the Indians had massacred every single one of Custer's 210 men, except for one lucky soul who'd been sent by Custer to take a message to the South forces asking for reinforcements. Sadly, his message was ignored. Custer's subordinates, Benteen and Reno, hated him and hated each other, and had just narrowly escaped a similar fate. Whether it was cowardice, malice, or possibly even drunkenness, we don't know. All we know is that they did not come to Custer's aid when he sent the message, "Come quick." In keeping with his image as a daring leader, Custer himself was found dead alongside 40 of his men, including his own brother and nephew, with 2 bullet wounds, one near his heart and one in his head. To further add to the horrors of the massacre, the Indians ritualistically stripped and mutilated the bodies of the dead, possibly because they believed the souls of disfigured bodies would be doomed to walk the earth forever. A junior military officer, upon seeing the naked bodies of his dead compatriots, famously exclaimed, "Oh, how white they look! How white!" It was once believed that Custer had been spared this indignity, but it was later revealed that his body had also been mutilated, but that the details were hushed up to protect his wife Libby. According to legend, some Cheyenne women pierced Custer's eardrums so that he could learn to listen better, and they even put a stick up his, manhood. Custer was hastily buried where he fell with the rest of his men, but he was later disinterred and reburied with a great ceremony at West Point. A memorial to him was erected in 1881 at the site of the battle. The Battle of the Little Bighorn was the U.S.'s biggest defeat in the Plains Indian Wars. The Indians' victory was short-lived, however. The American public demanded retribution for the death of Custer, a decorated Civil War general and American folk hero. So the Army intensified their efforts to hunt down Indians and either relocate them or wipe them out completely. Facing unprecedented violence against his people, Crazy Horse finally surrendered in 1877, bringing the Plains Indian Wars to a close. We have his devoted wife Libby to thank for the enduring power of Custer's controversial legacy. She lived another 57 years after his death, and spent the rest of her life writing books and giving lectures about his heroism and gallantry. She was helped in her efforts by William Buffalo Bill Cody, a one-time scout for Custer who went on to create his famous Traveling Wild West show, a highlight of which was a reenactment of Custer's last stand, featuring real Native American warriors who had actually fought at the Little Bighorn. Custer was even immortalized on the silver screen when future President Ronald Reagan played him in the film Santa Fe Trail. Custer himself had written his autobiography shortly before his death, and My Life on the Plains went on to become a bestseller. After Libby's death in 1933, however, the American public began to acknowledge that perhaps Custer wasn't the flawless hero he'd been made out to be. At the height of his fame during the Plains Indian Wars, the New York Tribune wrote, "Future writers of fiction will find in General Custer most of the qualities which will go to make up a first-class hero. While his heroism might be up for debate in modern times, his legend certainly lives on today, and we suspect that the flamboyant glorymonger wouldn't have wanted it any other way." If you thought this was interesting, be sure to check out one of our other videos, like this funny and fascinating one or this hilarious and educational one. Whichever one you pick, we promise you won't need any of Custer's luck to get through it. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.